Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Sarah Cole. I'm an associate curator of antiquities at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's program, New Archaeology of Ancient Thrace, where we will explore the exciting archaeological discoveries being made in the lands of Thrace. So I'll begin today by giving you all a bit of an overview of the recent special exhibition at the Getty Villa Museum to which today's program is related. Then I will introduce Professor John Lee, who will give us an overview of ancient Thrace and the archaeological work that has been conducted there in the 20th and 21st centuries. And then we will have three guest speakers, Marguerite Damjanov, Maria Magdalena Stefan, and Despina Tsiafaki, each of whom will discuss their own archaeological work in Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece, respectively. Today's program complements a recent major international loan exhibition that we hosted at the Getty Villa Museum in Los Angeles called Ancient Thrace and the Classical World: Treasures from Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece. This special exhibition involved a major partnership between the Getty and the Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Bulgaria, as well as the National Archaeological Institute with Museum at the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. We were very honored to include loans from 14 different Bulgarian museums, as well as from Romania and Greece in this exhibition. The exhibition opened on November 4th of 2024 and was scheduled to run through March 3rd of 2025, but unfortunately, it was closed early due to the tragic outbreak of the Palisades fire on January 7th. I'll start just by showing you this map very briefly to orient you in terms of where we are in the world. So you can see the shaded area of ancient Thrace here, which is what the exhibition and today's program focus on, which encompassed most of what is now Bulgaria, as well as parts of Romania, Turkey, and Greece. These are some shots from inside the Getty Villa Museum, showing you the entrance into our special exhibition galleries on the second floor. And this is another view as you enter into the exhibition's first gallery. We begin the exhibition roughly around the year 1500 BCE, because it's around this time that a distinctive Thracian culture emerges in Bulgaria. And we were very lucky to include this wonderful group of objects that you see in the case in the foreground of this photo, which is known as the Vulcitron treasure, named for its place of discovery in Bulgaria. This is a group of solid gold banqueting vessels that were found by chance as a treasure hoard. And they reflect for us one of the things that the Thracians were best known for in antiquity, which was their rich metal resources. Thrace was known for its gold and silver mines, and Thracian artisans from very early on became highly skilled at working in these metals. The second gallery of the exhibition moves forward in time to a period known as the time of the Odrysian Kingdom. This was a time starting around the 5th century BCE, when many of the Thracian tribes were united under a single kingdom. And from this period, we have a number of wealthy tumulus burials containing rich object assemblages that reflect the wealth and cosmopolitanism of Thracian elites during this period. So we displayed a number of tomb groups in this gallery, where you can see that an individual's burial assemblage might include beautiful gold and silver jewelry, horse trappings, vessels, including luxury vessels imported from places like Athens, Greek painted pottery, ceremonial armor, and other luxury wares that the Thracians were importing from around the Mediterranean. So we can see their immense intercultural and inter-Mediterranean connections during this period. We were also very lucky to be able to display the finds from the tomb of a Thracian king named Seuthes III, which was excavated in 2004. To the left of center on this screen, you can see the amazing bronze sculpted bust of Seuthes III himself. This sculpted bronze portrait is one of the most remarkable examples of ancient bronze sculpture to survive from anywhere in the world. In this small gallery, we focused on the northern territories of Thrace in what is today Romania. So here you're seeing a group of objects that were excavated in a tumulus burial at the site of Aegean in Romania. And these include gilded silver ceremonial armor, vessels, and gold and silver horse trappings. We can see a lot of similarity between these objects and object assemblages found elsewhere in Thrace, which indicates that during this time period, various elite Thracian tribes and groups were in contact with each other and exchanging luxury wares, perhaps as a way to cement political alliances. In the final gallery of the exhibition, we feature a number of famous Thracian treasure hoards, including the gold Panagyriste treasure, which you see to the left of center, and a selection from the Rogozan treasure, which you see to the right of center. We also chronologically conclude the exhibition in this gallery by featuring some objects from the time when Thrace became a province of the Roman Empire. So we close the exhibition around the year 300 CE. So we've gone from about 1500 BCE to 300 CE throughout this exhibition. If you want to learn more about ancient Thrace, I strongly encourage you to check out the beautiful exhibition catalog that was produced by Getty Publications and which is available for purchase. This includes essays that show the most up-to-date scholarship on ancient Thrace and also includes beautiful images and descriptions of every artifact that was displayed in the exhibition. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Professor John Lee, who is Professor of History at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He's also a member of the Managing Committee of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens. His research focuses on war, society, and culture in the Greek and Persian worlds, and he's worked on excavations and led archaeological study groups in Greece and in Turkey. And recently, he has studied the history of African American classical scholarship. His numerous publications include A Greek Army on the March, Soldiers and Survival in Xenophon's Anabasis, and The First Black Archaeologist, A Life of John Wesley Gilbert. So please welcome Professor Lee.
Well, good morning, everybody, from Santa Barbara, and thank you, Sarah, for that very kind introduction. I'm delighted to be here as part of this program, for today's talks offer us new perspectives based on the latest research of an underappreciated region. Thrace was a vibrant and significant part of the ancient Mediterranean world, from the earliest times down into the Roman era. The Thracians had diverse neighbors in the 600s to the 300s BC. These included Greek city-states to the south, the kingdom of Macedon, that is the kingdom of Alexander and his father Philip, to the west. To the north, the nomads of the Eurasian steppe, and to the east, the mighty empire of Achaemenid Persia. So Thrace, in ancient times, was well known, but in the modern world, it has often received less attention. Why is that? Well, the region of Thrace crosses modern national boundaries, so its study has never been the exclusive focus of a single modern nation state. It is also a region that was crossed by the dividing lines of the Cold War in the 20th century. It's also, though, a matter of ancient sources. For a long time, scholars interested in this region had to rely on outside written sources for information about Thrace. Now, these sources included Greek poetry, drama, and history, as well as inscriptions from the Achaemenid Persians and artistic representations from both Persia and from the Greeks. Now, these sources provide us much valuable evidence. Indeed, the Greek writers Herodotus, Thucydides, and Xenophon are very important for understanding ancient Thrace, but fundamentally, they give us outsider perspectives, often focused on politics and warfare. if we want to find an insider perspective on ancient Thrace, we have to look elsewhere. And what alternatives do we have? In searching for Thracian sources, we have immediate challenges. Unfortunately, our Thracian written sources are limited at best. We do have a number of Thracian inscriptions, and while we can decipher some of the alphabetic script of these texts, we cannot yet understand the underlying Thracian language or languages. Now, sometimes we do have Greek and Thracian texts on the same stone. And when that is the case, we can make some guesses at what the Thracian content might be. Coins issued by Thracian kings and other leaders help us understand how these Thracian rulers portrayed themselves and their realms. But even this coin evidence is limited. So the lack of Thracian written sources means archaeology is absolutely crucial for understanding many aspects of Thracian society, culture, religion, the economy, and more. And there has been interest in Thracian archaeology since the late 1800s, with excavations going on in the region since the early 1900s. The kinds of excavation contexts we have best represented are often funerary, that is, burials, and they include these rich burials in tumulus mounds. Just to give you one example, the excavation of the Mushovica tumulus in 1930 revealed these beautiful gold ornaments showing us the wealth and culture of elite Thracian women. As important as archaeology is, however, looting, loss, and pure luck are major themes in the archaeology of Thrace. Because while there have been some organized excavations, in other cases, looting and loss have been unfortunate and significant factors. Again, to give you one example, the Aegean tumulus in Romania, discovered by chance in 1931 and haphazardly excavated. The structure of this tomb itself was used as a stone quarry and subsequently destroyed, and some of the objects from the tomb were lost during the Second World War. Along with these losses, we've had some spectacular finds. In fact, some of the most famous finds result from pure luck, and these are hoards of precious treasure discovered by accident and usually lacking any clear archaeological context. Here's one example of such luck. In 1949, three brothers, Pavel, Petko, and Mikhail Deikov, were working at a tile factory in the southern Bulgarian town of Panagurishte. While digging for clay, they stumbled upon an astonishing discovery: a group of 9 gold vessels buried in the ground, untouched since antiquity. We'll hear more about this treasure and other treasures in today's presentations. Now, the last few decades have seen a wide range of new archaeological work by international scholars across the Thracian region. And it's crucial to emphasize that this new work represents controlled scientific exploration with careful surveying, digging, and recording using the latest technology, all of which offers us the necessary archaeological context for these amazing new finds. Because beautiful as they may be, without context, treasures are very difficult to interpret. And in addition to magnificent tombs, these excavations are starting to reveal more about Thracian cities and settlements, and also about Greek colonies in Thrace, such as the colony of Apollonia Pontica on the Black Sea, about which you will hear more today. And along with the beautiful objects that I've shown you in this introduction, it's worth remembering that even the humblest artifacts, as our presenters will share with us, can have important stories to tell. Here's one that I personally am very fond of. This cup from the early 550s BC was found at Apollonia Pontica. It is inscribed in a rare form of Greek alphabet by a man from the island of Knidos, an island more than 600 miles or 1,000 kilometers south of the place where it was found at Apollonia Pontica. I think it is a great symbol of the interconnectedness of the Thracian region in antiquity. So I hope that you are as thrilled as I am to be here for today's program, and I am now honored to introduce our three speakers and invite them to turn on their cameras momentarily to be recognized. So I'd like to welcome our speakers. You can read their full bios in the chat. All three are extremely distinguished archaeologists with long records of investigation and publication and recognition. But I'll be short and sweet here, reading their names and their talk titles. We will start with Dr. Margaret Damjanov, who is an associate professor in the Department of Thracian Archaeology at the National Archaeological Institute with Museum in the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences in Sofia. Dr. Damjanov will speak about a new look at dynamic times, ancient Thrace and Alexander the Great. Dr. Damjanov will hand off to Dr. Maria Magdalena Ștefan, an archaeologist with the Romanian National History Museum in Bucharest, who will speak on Borderlands, the northern Thracians and the edge of the Greek world. And last but not least, Dr. Despinația Faki, Director of Research of the Cultural Heritage Unit Athena Research Center in Xanthi, will speak on the archaeological heritage of Aegean Thrace. Each speaker will speak for about 25 minutes and hand off directly to the next speaker in the series. At the end, we'll have time for questions and discussion. And as a reminder, please use the Q&A function for your questions. So without further ado, I will hand things over to Dr. Damjanov.
Thank you. I hope you hear me. Thank you, Professor Lee, for the kind introduction. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you from Sofia today and to speak on behalf of the large community of Bulgarian archaeologists who have made these fabulous discoveries and contributed much to the knowledge of ancient Thrace. So, among the various Thracian tribes inhabiting what is today Bulgaria were the Udricei, a group that united the Thracians under the Udrician kingdom starting in the 5th century BC. The focus of my presentation is the period beginning in the later 4th century BC when Philip II, father of Alexander the Great and king of the neighboring kingdom of Macedonia, conquered Thrace, ushering in a period of Macedonian domination. Our increasing knowledge of the archaeology of ancient Thrace in this period reveals a picture of flourishing centers of wealth and power that have bequeathed to us some of the most recognizable Thracian monuments, as well as of increased inclusion in the expanding Hellenistic world following Alexander's conquest. So I'll leave this map with you just to get acquainted with the geography, and the sites that are in red will be commented in more details in my presentation. To start with the obvious, our knowledge of ancient Thrace is dependent on, or even preconditioned by, the scantiness of our written sources. The invaluable snippets of information provided by ancient Greek authors like Herodotus, Thucydides, or Xenophon illuminate short periods when, for some reason, Thrace became involved in major events that interested their Greek audiences. We owe the image in Thucydides of the large and powerful Odrysian kingdom to the role King Ctesias and his heirs played in the Peloponnesian War, the major conflict between Athens and Sparta between 431 and 404 BC. In this case, it is fortunate that we have the contemporary treasures from the aristocratic burials in Duvanli, Bulgaria, to illustrate the wealth of the Thracian nobility and its entanglement with the Greek world, with the lavish silver-gilt drinking vessels probably sent to Thrace from Athens. In the first half of the 4th century, the presence of the Odrysians on the larger stage of the Aegean history is linked mainly with King Cotys I, a most ambitious ruler who threatened the interests of Athens in the north of Aegean. Yet at the same time, it is almost impossible to associate his rule with any specific archaeological site, for example, a capital or a royal necropolis of the scale of the one at Duvanli. And if we are to trust the ancient author Athenaeus, the king used to travel around his domain and build banqueting halls at shady places with abundant water. Nonetheless, the authority of Cotys is eloquently attested by the numerous finds of silver vessels bearing his name. and offered to him as gifts or tribute. The Borvo treasure you see here being the most spectacular one. The toponyms noted as tribute bearers come from the lands in the southeast of Thrace. You see here the dotted border. But intriguingly, all the finds of such vessels come from the lands to the north of the Balkan Range. And they were presumably sent as diplomatic gifts, which would mean that in these regions, Cotys relied more on alliances with local dynasts. A glimpse of how Cotys ruled his kingdom is offered by a Greek inscription from Pistyros, a Greek trading center in the Thracian territories founded during the Thracian kingdom. So it refers explicitly to arrangements made in the time of Cotys, implying the existence of earlier such documents. Therefore, we can imagine written agreements between the Thracian kings and the Greek cities on the Aegean and the Black Sea coasts. Eventually, the aggressive policies of Cotys to the southeast forced the Athenians to allegedly organize his murder late in 360 BC, just before another ambitious ruler, Philip II, ascended the throne of the neighboring kingdom of Macedonia. In due course, the Macedonian expansion swept Thrace, which was conquered in 340 BC. The following decades, down to the death of Lysimachus, Alexander the Great's successor and king of Thrace, in 281, seemingly passed under Macedonian domination. However, the actual picture that has emerged from the archaeological investigations in Bulgaria is much more complex. The details of the actual Macedonian conquest remain murky, although the sources inform us that Philip II founded settlements in Thrace to serve as Macedonian strongholds, among them Philippopolis, present-day Plovdiv, and Kabyle in the Thracian plain, where they controlled the major roads along the Hebros and Tonsus rivers. Recent discoveries, however, were able for the first time to shed more direct light on the advancement of the Macedonian troops in Thrace. In the early 2000s, an archaeological site was excavated at Kozigramadi Peak at 1,100 meters above sea level in Srednagura mountain, consisting of a large monumental building within a fortified compound. The main building, with massive stone walls, has been tentatively interpreted as a monumental hall, possibly one of those banqueting halls of the Thracian kings, like described by Athenaeus. It is a remarkable discovery by itself, being among the very few examples of monumental Thracian architecture, aside from tombs, and investigated in the core territories of the Thracians. Notably, it's only 6 kilometers away from one of the largest and most elaborate Tholos tombs in Thrace, in Cetinjova Tumus near Starosel, which is like 6 kilometers away. And while the date of Cetinjova Tumus remains debatable, Petrova Tumus, which was immediately next to it, yielded this spectacular inventory comprising gold and silver objects and Greek pottery from the time of King Cotys or his heir. Traces of fire indicate that the complex at Kozigramadi suffered from an enemy attack, and importantly, there is this direct evidence about what caused its destruction. A large collection of lead sling bullets, almost 160, some of them inscribed with names, were collected from the complex and its immediate surroundings. The names on the bullets belong to Anaxandros and Cleobulus, two military commanders of Philip II, who well known from other sites related to the Macedonian expansion. Thus, the Kozigramadi site for the first time offered tangible evidence of the actions of the Macedonian troops in 342-341 BC, when they captured this compound, which was apparently related to the Thracian royal court. The same two names, Anaxandros and Cleobulus, are attested on sling bullets again, collected during field surveys at another mountainous site near present-day Sliven, 150 kilometers to the east. That's the other site on the map here. It appears to be another fortified site at 1,050 meters above sea level, and its relation to a local Thracian seat of power is exemplified by the numerous burial mounds in the region, among them the rich Dalakova tumulus dated to the first half of the 4th century BC. So, following the trail of the sling bullets to the east, we reach the Black Sea coast dotted with Greek cities. the written sources are particularly uninformative about how the Macedonian conquest under Philip II affected these communities. We know that Philip reached the Black Sea coast, but the only direct mention comes from an author from the 6th century AD who seems to relate a campaign of Philip II against Odessos, present-day Varna in Bulgaria. It's a very peculiar narrative. The Macedonian king besieged the city, but then local priests clad in white and plain liars came out of the gates, and the Macedonian king was awestruck and withdrew. However, recent discoveries and the reassessment of old ones shed some light on the process and possibly illustrate the actual drama of the events that unfolded in this period. Also, focusing on the sea allows me to touch upon my own research, which has been centered for decades on the Greek colony of Apollonia Pontica, the present-day town of Sozopol in Bulgaria, founded by settlers who came from the Greek city of Miletus on present-day Aegean coast of Turkey in late 7th century BC. And it was a very successful foundation, probably due to its very good harbor, but also to the exploitation of the copper deposits in the neighboring hills. And however, the city virtually disappears for some centuries from the written history from the later 4th century BC onwards. And turning to archaeology to fill the gaps, the first clues about what happened in Apollonia in this period comes from the necropolis of the city, extensively excavated in the last decades due to the rapid touristic development of the region. Thousands of burials were excavated, dated predominantly from the middle of the 5th to the middle of the 3rd century BC, and within this period some fluctuations were detected, including a disruption for a couple of decades in the later 4th century BC. This disruption is also confirmed by the materials from the bottom of Apollonia's harbor, which has been explored by underwater archaeological investigations since 2020. So we can see this is the bottom of the harbor as it was in the 5th or 4th century BC, and it's virtually carpeted with ancient pottery and other finds. So hundreds of vessels, trade amphora, and tableware, presumably discarded overboard by the ships moored in the harbor, testify to the active trade relations of Apollonia down to the middle of the 4th century, when the numbers dwindle almost to zero for some time, and then show a modest revival in the 3rd century BC. Another sign of a major crisis, this time affecting one of the main assets of Apollonia, its harbor and trade. So the chronology of these phenomena corresponds suspiciously well to Philip's conquests and the early period of the Macedonian domination in Thrace. Unsurprisingly, numerous lead-slinged bullets with names of military commanders have been discovered in recent years in and around Apollonia, testifying to a major clash with the advancing Macedonians, most probably a violent siege. Which insight allows for reinterpretation of a grim discovery from half a century ago. In 1966, during construction works, a stone burial chamber was uncovered within the limits of the necropolis of Apollonia. It was larger and more elaborate than other structures in the necropolis, but the most striking thing about it was the layer of burnt human remains, some 30 centimeters deep, that covered the entire floor. And 2 vessels also were found there, used as cinerary urns, a bronze hydria, and a red figure crater. It was apparently a mass burial of several dozen people at least, but not of the type related to epidemic or national disaster. The only conceivable explanation is that these were warriors slain in battle, and the chronology of the associated finds point again to the middle of the 4th century BC or just slightly later. Considering the evidence we already have, Philip's troops would be the main suspects. A coincidence or not, an intentionally twisted xiphos, a type of sword typical of the Macedonian army in this period, was discovered just nearby in 2014, and this is another sling bullet with another name from the vicinity of this tomb. So, while maybe not the root, the example of Apollonia serves to illustrate the dramatic events during the Macedonian conquest of Thrace. Then, in 335 BC, Alexander the Great, Philip's son, organized another campaign in the region, and a year later he crossed into Asia and left a series of military governors, or strategoi, to rule the Thracian lands. And on several occasions, we learn of Thracian reinforcements being sent to Alexander in Asia. His governor's Uperion deserves a special mention, as he organized a new fated military campaign in northeastern Thrace, where he perished with his entire army. And related to these events, we hear for the first time the name of Thracian Suites, who organized the revolt, and according to the ancient historian Curtius Rufus, Thrace was almost lost. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, one of his generals, Lysimachus, arrived in Thrace to reclaim it. He clashed with Suites, and the conflict ended in a draw. Over the next 10 years, Lysimachus managed to establish his control on parts of Thrace, including the Black Sea coast. In 313 BC, the Greek cities to the north of the Balkan Range revolted and expelled his garrisons, prompting Lysimachus to organize a campaign. At the same time, the troop of Antigonus, another former general of Alexander and a rival of Lysimachus, attacked from the south, apparently in a coordinated effort. So Lysimachus had to retreat south, only to find the mountain passes blocked by Suites. Then the Macedonian ruler prevailed against his attackers. And a recently excavated archaeological site in southeastern Bulgaria dates to precisely this period, a small fortified complex near the village of Kniazevo on the river Tonsus. The analysis of the amphora stamps from the site indicate it was built at some point between 315 and 310 BC and witnessed a particularly busy occupation in its first couple of years. It's very tempting to interpret this site as a garrison, probably established by Lysimachus in the context of the above described events. And it could have served as a border outpost, in this case, between him and the Thracian king Suites. The clash between Lysimachus and Suites in 313 BC is the last time we hear of Suites in the ancient sources, which is strange, as archaeological evidence suggests that Suetopolis, Suites' capital city, which he named after himself, was founded just around this time. This echoed the new royal foundations of Cassander, Antigonus the One-Eyed, and Lysimachus, all of them named after their founders. While relatively small, the new Thracian capital demonstrated a thoroughly Hellenistic appearance, from the orthogonal planning to the construction of the fortifications, possibly by Greek architects, and the elaborate architectural decoration of the monumental palatial complex, unfortunately almost completely lost. You can see here two marble fragments that give an idea of the adoption of Hellenistic fashions of very high quality. So these finds provide a broader context for the bronze portrait of Suites, undoubtedly the work of a prominent Greek sculptor discovered in 2004. Greeks and Macedonians did live in Suetopolis, as revealed by numerous graffiti with names, and the famous inscription from Suetopolis provides the only recorded mention of Suites' wife, Berenike, whose name indicates that she was a noble Macedonian lady. Another dynastic marriage will carry us to the north of the Haemus mountain, where the Thracian kingdom of the Getty flourished in the same period. At some point in the 290s BC, Lysimachus, who controlled the coast, moved against the Gettian king Dromichaites. Several ancient authors, most prominently Diodorus Siculus, refer to an unsuccessful campaign that ended with Lysimachus being captured by the Thracian ruler, and Pausanias relates that eventually the Macedonian king had to give his daughter to Dromichaites in marriage. For decades already, the Thracian city at Zborianovo in the northeast of Bulgaria has been identified as Helis, Dromichaites' capital. The large city, founded within the last quarter of the 4th century BC, had a fortified area of more than 10 hectares, or about 25 acres, and possibly a population of about 10,000 people. The Macedonian connection is well illustrated by several tombs of the so-called Macedonian type, with barrow-vaulted chambers in the sprawling necropolis. You can see the city on the map in the middle and the two large necropolis to the east and to the west of it. Most spectacular is the Caryatids tomb, dated to about 275 BC, with sculpture and painted decoration, and it has been tentatively identified as the tomb of Dromichaites, mainly because of the painted scene on the lunette in the main chamber, where the ruler on horseback is depicted with the horns of the god Ammon in the manner of Alexander the Great, which is fit for a king who vanquished the Simchus. In 2012, yet another testimony to the wealth and power of the Getty rulers were discovered, the remains of a chest full of gold artifacts dated to the late 4th or the early 3rd century BC. It was buried in another, even larger tumulus with a dismantled barrow-vaulted tomb. The treasure comprises personal adornments and a set of horse trappings similar to the one discovered in the tomb of Sutis in central Bulgaria. While farther away from the Aegean sphere, the Getty centrist Bulyanova illustrates the willingness of the local rulers to be part of the larger Hellenistic world by embracing imagery and practices. So one of those kings decided to present himself as a Hellenistic king on a par with Alexander and his successors, and also adopted the architectural type of the Macedonian tomb. However, this latter process was not automatic, as illustrated by the unique design of the Caryatids tomb, and it reflected local preferences and beliefs. But looking at tombs from the kingdom of Dromichaites and the Geta in the north and the kingdom of Sutis and the Odrysians to the south provides an opportunity to compare two distinct models of expressing this new Thracian identity within the larger frame of the Hellenistic world. While certainly of more Hellenized appearance, and most probably home to a considerable number of Greeks and Macedonians, the Odrysian realm of Sutis also managed to preserve its Thracianness, so to speak, and in a spectacular manner. Its necropolis have revealed the largest number of the most recognizable Thracian monuments, the Taulos tombs, or the beehive-shaped tombs, including probably the most famous one, the Kazanlak tomb with its paintings, which I will show you in a moment. According to the latest studies, Thracian Taulos tombs emerged around the middle of the 4th century BC, or just slightly later, virtually on the eve of the Macedonian conquest. They are typical of southern Thrace, only 3 have been discovered to the north of the Balkan Range, and the peak of their construction belongs to the last decades of the 4th and the first decades of the 3rd century BC, corresponding to the height of the kingdom of Sutis and his heirs. Out of 40 Taulos tombs in all of Thrace, 12 are located in the Kazanlak Valley in central Bulgaria, around Sotopolis. They are far from uniform and display a number of original designs, adopting elements of the Greek architectural orders, but using them in a non-Greek manner, apparently in accordance with the specific preferences of their wealthy owners. Thus, for some reason, unlike the northern capital of Hellas, here Macedonian tombs were not favored, and the local nobility stuck to its own Thracian practice to create Taulos tombs. The cities of Sotopolis and Hellas shared similar fates. The former was sacked and burnt, possibly about the middle of the 3rd century BC, while the latter was destroyed by a massive earthquake about the same time. And these events brought the end of a golden age in Thrace that was in many ways ushered in by the Macedonian conquest. This is a period of unprecedented historical visibility of the Thracian kingdoms, when we are able, and this is very important, to link specific sites to names and events in the written sources. And the general picture is constantly being enriched by new discoveries. A growing number of scholars relate this heyday and its numerous demonstrations of wealth and splendor to the return of the Thracians, who took part in the eastern campaign of Alexander the Great and brought back with them new riches, but also new tastes and ideas from places like Persia and Egypt. An increased influx of Greeks and Macedonians, traders, craftsmen, warriors, also marked this period of greater opening to the Hellenistic world. And a fitting illustration of these times is the paradox of the famous Panegyrista treasure. While not made by Thracians, it has become an instantly recognizable icon of the Thracian wealth. So this period of integration of Thrace with the classical Mediterranean was surpassed only by its later and, say, ultimate inclusion in the Roman Empire. And I went with this slide with the paintings, the murals from the tomb of Kazanluk, and a very incomplete list of many, many colleagues who shared knowledge and helped me to make this presentation for you. As they say, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. And here I'm pleased to pass on to Dr. Maria Maddalena Stefan, who will take us to the north reaches of Thrace. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret, for introduction, and thank you for this amazing presentation. I'm very happy I've seen it. Good morning, everyone, or good evening. I'm thrilled to be your next guide in today's journey on Thracian archaeology. My invitation for you is to dare venture even farther north than the lands already presented to you by the previous speaker, into a world which rarely entered the attention of ancient authors, and therefore remained shrouded in myth and misconception, a threshold between civilized and uncivilized, at least from the point of view of the ancient Greeks. You will get acquainted with some artifacts and archaeological sites discovered in Romania, some recently, other known for decades, but still raising new inquiries. Because it is important to understand, new archaeology is not just about new digs. Most of the time is about looking at old discoveries from different perspectives. You will see that these Thracian discoveries from Romania share many similarities with their southern neighbors, with artifacts uncovered in Bulgaria, Greece, or Turkey, but in addition that they incorporate striking nomadic influences coming from Eurasian steppe world. So the challenge here will be to find out if in a remote frontier zone located under cultural collision, eventually, local identities got diluted or, on the contrary, developed into unexpected hybrid forms of cultural expression. In the last third of the 7th century BC, Greeks from Miletus on the western coast of modern-day Turkey had already established their first colony settlements at key points along the Black Sea coast. One of these places of early focus were the Danube mouth, a symbolic boundary of the known world. Let's imagine a little bit this region as the ancient Greeks might have seen it. I think it was a true paradise, where the Danube, having traveled over 1,700 miles across Europe, parted into multiple branches, forming one of the largest ancient delta in Europe. Rich, fertile, and filled with wildlife, it was also abundant in vegetation, timber, fish, so a place of immense strategic and economic significance. It must have been somewhere near this river mouth in the late 6th century BC that a major historical event unfolded. The powerful Persian king Darius I crossed the Danube, pushing north to wage war against the nomadic Scythians. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, told us that of all the peoples Darius encountered on his long march through Thrace, only one group was foolish enough to resist, the Getty, whom he encountered just before arriving to the Danube. Unsurprisingly, the resistance failed against the might of the Persian Empire, but the name Getty, thanks largely to Herodotus' widely read account, became famous. And that's why it was later often used, sometimes quite broadly, by ancient and modern historians alike, to refer to the many anonymous communities living in the northeastern parts of the Thracian world. This group of artifacts made of basalt and deer antler found in the Greek colony of Istros near the Danube mouth is truly remarkable because it contains elements of horse trappings, which are typical for the Achaemenid cavalry of the 6th-5th century BC. And because such items could have traveled at such great distances only together with real horses, it is tempting to link them, at least at some point in their life, with a Persian presence at the Danube mouth. When did the Getty civilization emerge? Romanian archaeologists have determined recently by radiocarbon dating that when the first Greeks arrived in this northern landscape around the middle of the 7th century BC, the densely occupied local settlements from the earlier Iron Age had already vanished, as much as a century or more before. Why? We're still uncertain why. Perhaps it was climate change, or maybe distant conflicts caused in a ripple effect the local social bonds to collapse. What is clear is that when settlements reappeared in the archaeological record, they did so in close connection with the newly arrived Greeks, exactly in the space between the Danube and the Black Sea. So about 50 years of the Greeks setting up their coastal colonies like Istros, we start finding the earliest inland settlements containing a mix of Greek and local Thracian pottery. This is significant because this new material civilization belonging to the Getty and to other Northerners emerged from the start as one deeply connected with the Hellenic one. So what happened when these people first met? Archaeological features from early contact zone, like pits with fire-hardened walls containing fragments of fireplaces, but also Greek and Thracian pottery and even human and dog remains, suggest that at least a part of the activities in these settlements were ritual, possibly offerings to tonic or fertility deities. The presence of such rituals in the closest vicinity to the most important archaic Greek colony in the Western Black Sea, Istros, and the fact that they incorporated new Greek items, even religious objects like the terracotta statuettes, suggest that the local Thracian society didn't just trade goods with the Greeks. From the very beginning, they seem to have adopted and likely reinterpreted some Greeks' beliefs and practices. So in this case, religion didn't divide, but provided the common ground for exchanging values and symbols. Beneath these now wooded and remote hills at Çelik Dere lie the remains of two sizable ancient settlements and a large burial ground. This community in northern Thrace existed near a vital Danube pass, most probably the same that Dareios must have used to cross. Emerging at the time of his campaign, these northerners actively integrated outside influences. They embraced Greek wine and also pottery styles, and they even crafted well-made vessels inspired by Hellenic forms. But in the same time, their possession of items from north of the Black Sea, like this horse bridle and axe shaped as the head of a bird of prey, indicates that they were a point of contact, drawing trade and diplomatic gifts from the steppes. So the Greek arrival catalyzed not just commerce, but also the emergence, the appearance of new social and political forms. Beyond grain and timber, I think it's important to understand that slave trade may have boosted prosperity, with local elites supplying captives to the Greek markets. A hint about this violent environment is the fact that many Çelik Dere burials included full warrior gear, short iron swords, bronze arrowheads. These are weapons that follow largely nomadic steppe traditions. One burial in particular surprised us. It was the usual stone tumulus with well-made vessels and the full military panoply. But the news the anthropologist gave me was unexpected. Not only that the deceased was a woman, but she was heavily pregnant at the time of her death, or she had just given birth, as neonatal remains were identified alongside hers. Of course, we think immediately about the Greek myth of the Amazon-like figures, and we know that these myths are related to the Scythian world, and they are metaphors for the way the Greeks saw in a distorted way the exotic north. But we see here that also in borderland community of the North Thracians, warfare and social roles were shared. They were not ethnic constraints. The Danube mouth region holds even more stories about exceptional women from the past, like the two young ones lavishly buried in Aegean tomb. Part of their accompanying goods, helmet, greave, libation vessel, and horse harness, traveled last year to Getty. With Archaeology, we are already 100 years later than the Amazon of Chelidere, at the time Philip II, king of Macedon, was conquering Thrace. This was an extraordinary period of great social and political dynamism. The pressure placed by the Macedonian king on the Thracian chieftains, especially the Odrysians and their network of allies, was immense. And this can explain why these strongmen and chieftains and basileia were connected at the highest level, and they exchange ideas and also objects. And this explains why vessels like this one from Aegean, which originally were part of the Odrysian treasury, traveled so far in the north. And exactly in this period, during the wars of Philip, we find the true peak of demography and cultural development for the Getty and the other people living north of the Danube in remote places, because they became a valued resource in a political stage dominated by war. And even then, wars by proxy were a powerful tool. Not only goods of precious metals were used to seal alliances, but also other prestige gifts like magically decorated horses. 2 of the 3 horses sacrificed and buried with the women in Aegean had silver ornaments placed on their bridles. This can be considered initially a tribal fashion, a community which can be located in northwest today Bulgaria. One horse was dressed up like a griffin, the other like a lion. What we see here is a profoundly original cultural development of the North Thracian, who, in order to create these ornaments, included references to nomadic imagery, but let's discuss also to Hellenic symbolism. Both the lion and the griffin are the legendary beasts depicted in Hellenic art as the arch enemies of horses, in the typical animal battles meant to allure to the far north and the domain of Dionysos, to the afterlife, to the exotic north. Like in the decoration of the archaic Greek temples, the violent confrontation between prey and predators signals the liminality of sacred space, an essential condition for religious experience to take place. Women must have been, though, the main glue of these major military alliances, and Philip II himself was, in fact, a master of such diplomacy by marrying 7 times. Some of the artifacts found in the tomb of Aegean strongly point to the status of the deceased as diplomatic brides. The gold appliques belonged to a ceremonial headdress typical for high-status women in Near Eastern and North Pontic contexts, while the fragment of red-figured lecanis was decorated with a marriage scene, the vase itself being the typical one used in the Greek world in marriage ceremonies. So we see here this impressive mix of North Pontic, Odrysian, and also Greek references, and they reflect the complex negotiation of power and identity in a region caught in Philip wars against Thrace. Was Danube a border? Well, yes and no. It was wide enough to be a border, but it was also a space of diffusion and attraction. Certain discoveries from its left northern bank show not just a consistent degree of integration in the major political power networks of the day, but also an unexpected and sophisticated Hellenization of this very remote northern Thracian. And I will point just to 2 objects from the inventory of Peratu tomb here exhibited in full. First, it is this gilded silver head of a woman, a divine being or an ancestor, which should be regarded as one of the earliest metal statues in anthropomorphic shape locally made in Thrace. And secondly, to this silver tube, a Greek medical instrument used to drain liquids, for example, blood. The presence of this medical instrument connects our tomb with a group of prestigious military medics of classical antiquity, who are also versed in the art of divination and mystery religion. And probably the most famous one is the one buried in the crater of Derveni in ancient Macedonia. A recent study of the hill forts located north of the Danube in the vicinity of Peratu tomb revealed a lesser-known influence running in the opposite direction, this time from the north to south. In the 4th century BC, Northern Thracian began building enclosures using burnt clay as a core material for their fortification walls. This technique produced symbolic rings of fire, still traceable by aerial and geophysical surveys. So that is why when sun-dried mud brick as construction material arrived north with the Macedonian army, locals adapted it by kiln firing and inventing practically the fired bricks. This innovation likely influenced the development of built tombs with bricks like the one in Kazanlı, predating Roman use of baked bricks by centuries. With the Macedonian conquest came as well north the taste for gold. The silver helmets and horse ornaments, which were made initially in silver, began to be made now directly in gold. One remarkable hoard likely belonged to a high-status woman again. It includes a pair of bracelets or gold torques adorned with the ram head terminals. And we see again the triangular appliques from a North Pontic headdress. And also the cap of the helmet is decorated in such a way it resembles women's hair. The image of the ram carries strong sacrificial connotation and also a connection to the underworld, perhaps invoking elite religious symbolism rendered by Greek artisan for a northern patron, which lived hundreds and hundreds of kilometers north of the Aegean. It's a vivid example of hybrid identity and prestige at the edge of the Greek world. Another crucial object is the gold helmet of Cotopenești, a masterpiece of North Thracian art. Its recent theft from a Dutch exhibition left a scar in the Romanian's hearth. We see here again the ram sacrifice. This was the asexual ritual that allowed Ulysses to enter the realm of the dead, a Hellenic myth which might help elucidating the function of these items. The griffins and sphinxes represented on the neck guard belong to the same funerary sphere and Hellenized repertoire, even if the crafting hand is a local, naive one. Such objects reveal an incredible mix of Hellenic and Thracian worlds, both in manufacture but also in meaning. Now I will approach the end of my presentation by saying that during the Hellenistic period and the late classical period, the highest degree of funerary monumentality and opulence in northern Thrace belonged neither to the North Thracian nor to the Scythian, but to the Greek themselves. In the Greek polis of Calatis, more than 1,000 monumental mounds were built around the city, and some had gigantesque proportions. This one, measuring 12 meters high and 8 meters in diameter, which I investigated last year together with my colleagues, must have been built by tens of slaves, which worked during many months in the second quarter of the 3rd century BC. It contains what appears to be the largest Macedonian-type tomb known in the Western Black Sea. And it resembles the tombs we found in Thrace and in Macedonia in that time. And it's revealing about how the world was changing. After Philip II and Alexander the Great, even the smaller polities, being then Greek, Thracian, North Thracian, or Scythian, or Myxellenes, had access to different and homogeneous forms of religions, of beliefs in the afterlife, and they had access to models of power. Thank you for attention. I hope this presentation made you question some myth about the far north. And I hope I showed you that these Northerners were not just observers of the Greek ancient classical culture, but they were also participants. And now I will give the floor to Dr. Despinația Fachi.
Thank you. Hello from Greece. I would like first to thank the organizers for the kind invitation to include me to this program. And it's a pleasure to be here and to share with you a glimpse of the archaeological heritage of Aegean Thrace. Thrace in antiquity was and throughout its history was and still is a land rich in cultures, myths, thriving settlements, and deep-rooted traditions that come to life nowadays mostly through the material remains. Today, however, we're not going to talk about the entire ancient Thrace. You already listen a lot about the northern part of it. Rather, we will focus on Aegean Thrace, the southern part of Aegean Thrace, which is part of northern Greece. The archaeological research in the area has been carried out for more than a century. However, it has been intensified the last decades, with a great part of it being still unexplored. Excavations, research projects in combination with digital technologies and modern techniques taking place the last years contribute significantly to our knowledge for the archaeological research of ancient Thrace. The up-to-date finds present a vivid image of the ancient landscape, but still there are serious gaps here. So our attempt today is to travel through time and space along the Aegean Thrace and get some highlights of its past that goes back to the prehistoric times. And we should mention here that the prehistory of the Aegean Thrace is not well known yet, and the recent archaeological investigations bring to life a lot of information regarding this part of it. And among those projects who investigate the prehistoric past of Aegean Thrace is Map Farm, mapping the early farmers in Thrace, which explores the Neolithic settlements located in the vicinities of Rhodope and Xanthi. And we see here two characteristic examples, one in Paradimi, and some of the findings there, and Paradimi is in the area of Rhodope, and the other one in the Diomedia in Xanthi. We should also mention here that in those two vicinities, there are located 23 Neolithic settlements out of the almost 30 Neolithic settlements known up to date in the Aegean Thrace. Another project regards the archaeological and geophysical research in the Perea of Samothrace. Samothrace is this island here in Aegean Thrace. There are two islands, the island of Thassos and the island of Samothrace. And this project explores the Perea of Samothrace, this area across the island, and aiming to explore the diachronic land use from prehistory to modern times, and in relation to the complexities of the environment and the natural resources in this area. A third project regards the arena, collects the archaeological publication on ancient sites in Aegean Thrace from the time of the Greek colonization to the end of the Hellenistic period, roughly from the 8th to the 8th century BC to the 1st century BC. Here are also collected the current projects as well as the excavations that take place in the region. So this is our focus area, and we should start chronologically with the earliest sites. And the last years, again, we are fortunate enough through the archaeological research to have locate and to get knowledge about the earliest habitations in Aegean Thrace that goes back to the Paleolithic period. Something we didn't know before. We see there are some sites that date back to the Paleolithic period, and among them there are the two examples we see here. One in Thassos, an occult mine, and another one in the Evros region at Petrota, where we see this large hill that was used as raw material for the production of stone tools. And what's interesting here is that the exploitation of the site began in the Paleolithic period and lasted until the modern post-war years, after the Second World War. Moving to the time, we get into the Neolithic period. And here we have two characteristic examples of Neolithic settlements. One is the Neolithic settlement at Promachon, Topolnitsa. And what's interesting here that it is that this site is located exactly on the borders of Bulgaria with Greece, and it is explored by teams from both countries. The other settlement, Neolithic settlement, is this in Sitagri, which is inhabited in Neolithic period as well as in the Bronze Age. And what we see here is the burnt house that dates from the Bronze Age. The last Neolithic site we will see today is the Kilitas, which is in the area of Drama. It's a Neolithic site, but with habitation not only in the Neolithic time, has the longest habitation period. There are remains from also the Bronze Age, as well as the Hellenistic and Roman times, and even a Byzantine tower. It's located up here. But what's more important and maybe more interesting about the Kilitas is that it's our earliest evidence for wine consumption and wine production, and this goes back 6,000 years ago. And wine production, it's something that it's widespread in Aegean Thrace, and we find it from antiquity until nowadays in the entire region. Maybe that's the reason that Dionysus is related to the area, and we find evidence of his presence in various places and artifacts. So we see here a clay mask of depicting Dionysus from the archaeological site of Zoni. We will see Zoni in a little bit. And also Dionysus on a silver coin from Maronia, another important site of the region we will see in a little bit. A marble head of Dionysus from Thassos, and a gold ring depicting Dionysus from Regio in Evros vicinity. But there are also sanctuaries of Dionysus in the area, and one of those is the one that has been located in the area of Maronia. And this sanctuary dates in the 4th century BC. Well, and as you can see, there is also another clay mask depicting Dionysus from the same area. So, leaving the prehistoric times and getting into the historic times, which are closely connected with the Greek colonization and the establishment of Greek colonies Appikie in the Aegean Thrace, we should start by looking at the landscape. What was the inviting landscape for the Greeks to come and establish their colonies there? And of course, we will take some glimpses from the current landscape in order to understand the past. So here are some views from the Rhodope Mountains. That's the northern portion of Aegean Thrace. Rich in forests, areas, and timber, a valuable resource for exploitation, for ship building, for example. The Pangaean mountain rich in silver and gold that was used extensively, not only for artifacts, but mainly for minting coins. And it's also a region rich in rivers, starting with Strymon at the west, Nestos in the middle, Evros and Ardas at the eastern edge of the area, and lakes such as the Vistonis Lake. And in this environment, settlers from various places from Greece start coming in the 7th century BC. And in the western part of Aegean Thrace is located the earliest colony in the region, and this is Archelos, a colony, an apikia founded by people who came from Cyclades and specifically the island of Andros. The archaeological research, which is a collaboration between the Greek Euphoria of Antiquities and the Canadian Institute and the University of Montreal, has brought to light public and private buildings, roads, and many movable findings. Among the public buildings is the one depicted here, which was based on the findings we have from here. We know that it was related with the use of water. Just next to Archelos is located Amphipolis, an Athenian colony of strategic importance, also as Archelos next to the fertile Strymon Valley and the Pangaean gold mines. Amphipolis was founded in the period of Pericles after the mid of 5th century BC, and that was considered a great success for Athenians, whose chief purpose was to ensure control of the rich Strymon hinterland and the Pangaean mines. As you can see, we have important findings from the site. You see the ritual vessel of Kernos that's related to the festival of Thesmophoria. And we have a Thesmophorian here located in Amphipolis, just outside the fortification walls, which, as you can see, are preserved in extremely well state. But from Amphipolis, we have also athletic activities, buildings, structures such as this one, where is located the gymnasium and the palestra of the city. In the vicinity of Amphipolis belongs also another important monument that became really famous in the news, in newspapers the last decade, and this is the Kastas monument. It's an ancient tomb. It's related closer to the Macedonian type tomb and dates in the last quarter of the 4th century BC. And even though the first excavations took place back in the 60s, the inner tomb was first discovered in 10 years ago. And even though it was looted, the findings show a quality and artistic merit that show that it contained important people. The remains of 5 people were found in this tomb. The second island in the Aegean Thrace is Thassos. We mentioned Samothrace, and we will see Samothrace in a little bit. And Thassos was an Parian colony. It was an apikia by people who came from the island of Paros in the mid 7th century BC. And by the time, little after the time they arrive and settle in Thassos, we get a view of the ancient theater of Thassos, which was renovated recently, and there are theatrical performances there. So as soon as the settlers settled, established their colony, they went to the mainland opposite their island, and establish new colonies there as well in a zone across the coast that's known as Thracian Perea. There are several cities in this Thracian Perea, and among them was Crinides, which was refounded and renamed by Philip II, the father of Alexander the Great, as Philippi. And Philippi is famous. You can get a view of the site. Philippi is mostly famous for the theater, which has just been restored, and you see it after the restoration works. The theater is open for different performances, and there is the festival, an annual festival in the summer. Moving to the east, the next vicinity we see is this of Xanthi. And here the most representative site is the Apgia, the colony of Avdira, which is located nearby the river Nestos. Avdira is the birthplace of the philosopher and nuclear physicist Democritus, and Protagoras, and of many other famous men. The founding of the city, according to the mythical tradition, is related to the 8th labor of Heracles, the capture of the man-eating horses of Diomedes, who was the king of the Thracian tribe of Vistones. However, we know from the literary sources that Avdira were twice colonized, one first in the 7th century BC by Clazomenians, and 1 year later, 1 century later, in the 6th century BC, it was colonized by Ionians from Teos in Asia Minor, who were abandoned their city, being unable to suffer the Persian domination. And you get a view of Avdira and the buildings. This is the site recently renovated again. And I will just mention these miniature vessels, which are some miniature idriske. They come from the sanctuary of Demeter, and they were found 20,000 of them. So it is a remarkable finding. Moving to the vicinity of Rhodope, we have another colony of Chians this time, and that's Maronia. You get a view of the modern town of Maronia. And Maronia was a Chian colony. Chians came here in the area of Ismaros Mountain, where they were, which was inhabited by the Thracian tribe of Kykones. And the area was this is the Acropolis of Agios Georgios, which was inhabited in that time. In Maronia have been unearthed a number of private and public buildings, and among them characteristic is the theater, which was also recently restored, and some performances take place there sporadically. Important is also this building that was used as storing space, and it's located nearby the ancient harbor. You can get a view of Maronia here. And this monumental propylon, which is associated with the Emperor Hadrian's visit to Maronia in the 2nd century AD. Nearby Maronia is found another settlement in the area of Molivoti, and the current excavations that take place there have, as well as the ones that took place in the 20th century, have brought to life parts of a city that dates back in the 6th century BC, but the earliest findings provide us a lot of information about the 4th century and later. So it's a collaboration of the Ephorate of Antiquities of Rhodope and the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, represented by the Princeton University. So here is the exploration of an archaic classical trading port, which is often associated with ancient Strimi. And Strimi is mentioned by the literary sources that it was the easternmost colony of Thassos, and bordered its eastern border. So thanks to the archaeological research have been brought to life city walls, storage pits, houses, streets, as well as a subterranean aqueduct, which was consisted by tunnels, shaft systems, and wells. One of the last findings in the site is this sanctuary that dates in the Hellenistic times after the 300 BC, and it was unearthed in 2023. It's very important discovery due to the fact that there are not many sanctuaries known so far in this area. The island of Samothrace was one of very important places in the antiquity. You see on the map the archaeological sites and monuments on Samothrace, but here the detail of the focus area today, which is the sanctuary of the Great Cats, the Kaviri. And we should say that Kaviri were divinities celebrated with mystical rites. Their number varies from 2 to 7. And in Samothrace, they appeared as protectors of seafarers, like the Dioscuri, and were worshipped together with the locally venerated chthonic divinities. The Samothrace sanctuary of Great Gods is excavated by an American team already started before the Second World War by the Institute of Fine Arts in New York University. And since 2012, the Emory University has joined the team. And all this is under the supervision of the Ephorate of Antiquities of region of Evros. So you can see here that many buildings were found of the sanctuary, so we have a good picture of it. And attempts for the reconstruction of the sanctuary have been done throughout the years. And in this, there is no time to see it now, but in this link, you may see a recent reconstruction of the sanctuary of the Great Gods in a 3D model, as it should be in the early 1st century AD. And the findings from the sanctuary, as well as from the rest of Samothrace, are exhibited in the recently reopened Museum of Samothrace, which had its opening last summer, in the summer of 2024. So the last vicinity we will see today is that of Evros. And here we will see at the ancient, as we said, from Samothrace, across Samothrace, there was the Samothracian Perea, the Perea of Samothrace, and one of the cities that was founded by people who came, settlers who came from Samothrace, is Zoni, opposite the island of Samothrace. And Zoni is the only identified and well-excavated city of Samothracian Perea. And it is in the area was found public and private buildings, and among the findings that helped to identify the site is a great number of coins. Up to 7,000 coins have been, over 7,000 coins have been discovered here. In Zoni, we have also a lot of information about the coexistence of Greek and Thracians, something we have also in other sites. But here, this coexistence is proved also by common rituals and cults. In Zoni, there have been located 2 sanctuaries, one of Demeter, which we'll see here, and this sanctuary dates in the 6th century BC and contained a treasure of over 140 plaques made of silver, gold, copper, all dating to the 4th century BC. The 2nd sanctuary in Zoni is the one of Apollo, and the temple of Apollo has been excavated here, dates in the late 6th century BC, and it's the most important public building of ancient Zoni, and also the only identified archaic sanctuary of Apollo in Aegean Thrace. From here comes the torso of the Kouros we see, but more important here, and in providing information for the common cult of Thracian and Greeks to the sanctuary, is the evidence coming from these inscriptions on Greek pottery, mostly Attic pottery, and they are Thracian inscriptions using Greek letters, and those, some of them preserve the name of Apollo in order to identify the god, and they represent the largest collection of Thracian inscriptions to date in the entire Balkans, and allow us to approach a local Thracian dialect, which shows a remarkable affinity with the Greek language. Moving to northern of this, the vicinity of Evros, we see Plotinopolis, which is located southwest of the Dimotchon, nearby the rivers Evros and Erythropotamus. And Plotinopolis was founded by Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century AD, who named it after to honor his wife Plotini. From Plotinopolis come important evidence that it was an important Roman city. So there are buildings and mosaic floors, part of baths. We see here parts of a well, and maybe the most important finding is this 24-karat gold bust of the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus. And the last stop of our tour today is the funerary tumulus of Mikri Doxipara, which is an imposing monument and the largest of the tumuli excavated in the Greek part of Thrace. And this tumulus was constructed in a prominent location approximately midway between Plotinopolis, which I saw, and Andrianopolis. This tumulus was gradually constructed during the first half of the 2nd century AD to cover the cremations of 3 men and 1 woman. Alongside the deceased were buried 5 wagons with their horses, 5 additional horses, and the dogs. We see here the tumulus and the first cremation. Here is the second cremation. In both those 2 was buried a man. And this funerary tumulus appears that it served as a burial place for the members of a land-owning family. The exact location of the family's residence remains unknown for now, as no settlement remains have been discovered in close proximity of the tumulus. And from the movables findings, I will just point out this amber ring, which depicts in relief Eros embracing Psyche. Thank you. And I think that now I'll pass to John. Yes.
Yes, so thank you so much to all of our 3 speakers, Dr. Damjanov, Dr. Stefan, Dr. Tsiafaki. I'd like to invite all 3 of our speakers to turn their cameras back on. And there we go. So first of all, thank you so much. I have pages of notes in front of me. People are asking how they can get printed versions. I think that all 3 of you have successfully put Thrace at the center of our attention in a way that a few of us had it before. So we have time for questions. People have been putting questions in the chat, but I hope that if you want to ask a question, please add it to the Q&A because it's easier for us to see. I just would like to start with 1 question for each of our speakers, and then I will draw from the Q&A, where it seems many people are very interested in asking questions about gold, but we have a lot of thoughtful questions. So a brief question for each of you to get us started. So first to you, Dr. Damjanov, I would love to know just 1 or 2 more things about your excavations at Sozopol, where you said you had worked. You focused on the destruction of the city and the cremation burial, but if there was something else exciting that you thought was particularly significant from your work there, especially in terms of Thracian Greek interactions or anything else, I would love to hear more about that.
All right, but that cannot be a brief answer. My main focus in fieldwork in the last decade, I should say, is you've shown in your introduction 2 temples on the island of St. Curik. These are excavations under the direction of Dr. Kristina Panayotova and me on the island of St. Curik. And this is the core of the ancient Greek town. It is the temenos. You've shown 2 temples. During the last 3 seasons, we uncovered the remains of a 3rd temple. So we have 3 temples, an altar, and remains that go back to the late 7th century BC. And about the Thracians and the Greeks, in all those early layers, we in each context we have this imported fineware from East Greece or later Attic pottery, but in the 6th century we have all the time like these coarser jars of local Thracian shapes that are also there in the temenos in those layers. So we do have this. Not as beautifully demonstrated as in Zone, for example, with the inscriptions in Greek and Thracian, but we do have this mingling, this cohabitation, and this constant contact between Greeks and Thracians already from very early times. So this is very, very important, and we're trying to gradually present it to the world.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Damyanov. A question now for Dr. Stefan. The tomb or the burial at Çelik Dere, I think that many in the audience would like to know more about the remains that were found and the interpretation of those finds. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that particular tomb?
So, yes, it is an amazing burial, isn't it? It was built around 450 BC. In the most prominent place of the entire cemetery, on the top of the hill near an ancient road, so was visible for all the community, and it was an individual grave. So it was a tumulus of stone which was dedicated to this woman who died probably giving birth, but she was equipped for death with all the weapons. I think it is important to understand that cultural models transcend identity, and this is the main contribution of this grave.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that many people will be interested in learning more about that grave in particular. And for Dr. Tsiofaki, I saw in the chat and in Q&A questions about wine. And you talked early on in your presentation about the early evidence for wine in Aegean Thrace. What evidence do we have for the spread of winemaking technology and wine culture further into Thrace, or for the independent development of winemaking elsewhere in the region?
Actually, we have a lot of information, and that was the earliest one in Neolithic times, and I thought that was impressive. That's why I mentioned it. But we know, for example, from the literary sources, and I will quote Homer, who talks about the famous wines of Ismaros, or Inos Ismarikos, in the area of Maronia. And therefore, I mentioned the Ismaros when Odysseus went in the area, and the priest of Maron, priest of Apollo, offered him wine from the region. Also, in the area of Drama was Vivlia Hora, where Vivlinosinus was produced. So along the coast in Avira, also we have information about wine production. And there was really great knowledge and technology about the production. And throughout antiquity, and even nowadays, along the Aegean coast, we have wine production, and there are also local types of grapes for local that go back to antiquity. So it was really widespread all over there.
Thank you so much, all of you. So let me start with some questions from the Q&A. As I mentioned, there are many about gold. We can, one audience member asked, where does the gold come from in Thrace? Is the gold mixed with other metals? And how does Thracian metalwork differ from or resemble metalwork that we see in other areas of Thrace around the same time? And we don't have to have everyone answer, but anyone who would like to take that question can volunteer.
I can start, and then I think they can fill in. I can start from the knowledge about the Aegean Thrace again. As I mentioned, Mount Pangaeon is one of the valuable resources for gold and silver. There are also other areas in Thrace as sources for gold and silver. And this was exploited in order, especially for minting coins all over the site, from Thracians themselves, and as well as from Greeks. And that was one of the reasons that the region was so attractive to the Greek settlers and colonists and Athenians and Macedonians who wanted to have control in the area. And we have the production of artifacts, not just by the Thracians, but also by other people such as Athenians. And in some cases, in many cases, gold and silver was exported. also, we should mention that it's well known that Thracians were very knowledgeable in metalworking, and that was one of the reasons that Pisistratos took people from Thrace when he was in exile in Thrace, in Mountain Pangaeon, and transferred them in Lavrion, where were the silver mines in Attica. Maybe Margaret and Maria Magdalena would like to add something in this.
If I can... Oh, just Maria, please.
Yes, I was given the microphone, let's say. I want to say something from the perspective of North Thrace, because we have in Romania famous gold mines in the Carpathians, but they were exploited starting with the Roman times. So probably in the Iron Age, some gold from the rivers probably was collected and some artifacts were made from this material. But I think the majority of the gold in this classical Hellenistic period arrived via Greek cities. After the conquest of Alexander the Great, of the Persian treasury, a lot of precious metals invaded all the Mediterranean, and so you had access, and they were paying the Thracian mercenaries sometimes with gold coins. So there was gold, a lot of gold, and there was the taste for gold in this period. So we shouldn't ignore the Greek markets and the Greek supplies of precious metal.
Marguerite, you want to add?
Yes, I just wanted to take the gold problem a little bit further back in time to the late Bronze Age, because Bulgarian archaeologists have excavated at present at least the most ancient gold mine in Europe, which is in the eastern Rhodope mountain. It dates to the second half of the second millennium BC, at the Adatepe peak, and it was like an industrial scale gold mining. Otherwise, many rivers in Thrace are gold bearing, and for example, the Vouchitron treasure that visited Los Angeles, the analysis show it was made by placer gold, by alluvial gold. So a lot of gold sources in the area, but in classical times, those on the Aegean coast, Tassos and Pangaeon in the region was absolutely very rich and very famous.
Thank you. Maybe one follow-up from a viewer. The viewer asked, in addition to exporting or exchanging worked objects, such as the ones that you've talked about, do we have any evidence for the Thracian supply of unworked gold, export of unworked gold and silver around the Mediterranean?
Okay, so that mine at Adatepe from the late Bronze Age, it was part of this network exchange in the Mycenaean time. So gold from there possibly reached further regions to the south. But well, in classical period, it's difficult because you need analysis to establish provenance of the gold. But in these periods, there were many gold sources, and gold from many places got mixed and melted together. So it's a little bit more difficult, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Marguerite is absolutely right. But there is the assumption that gold was exported, and that was exported in areas related and having trading contacts and all that with Thrace, and that makes sense. Otherwise, I don't think that Athenians or Macedonians or any other people from Miletus, Ionians would be really interested in the area. Gold and silver was among their precious resources of the area. So I don't think that they just worked it there, but apparently they exported and imported in other regions as well.
Thank you. A question for Dr. Stefan. How was it determined that the device that you termed a catheter was a catheter and used that way?
The catheter is a very simple instrument. It's a tube which has a wider end and a narrower end, and it is very traditional. It didn't change for millennia, so it is something which you can recognize very easily. But in fact, this tube was somehow ignored. So for many years after the discovery of this tomb, it wasn't explained. But the Greek colleagues published a lot of interesting works about the medical instruments associated with this high-status military. We have also some medical instruments which were found in Bulgaria, also in Zlatinica Mound or in Vraca Mound, and they are part of the equipment of aristocrats. So it's more than just helping someone to be healthy. It's also a symbol about dealing with life and death, the power to deal with life and death.
Thank you. Here's another question maybe that follows up on the questions of the body and life and death. A viewer asks, is the practice of tattooing reflected in any of the material culture that we see? For example, can we see representations in art or in metalwork of decorations on human bodies?
As for that, sorry.
Please. We have here a greave on the screen, which has half of her face decorated with stripes of gold, and which is traditionally interpreted as a ceremonial tattoo. So, and there are several such representations, especially on metal objects of Thracian production, which can be assumed to be tattoos, face tattoos.
And next to the metal, we have evidence for Thracian tattoos on Attic vase painting. The Attic red figure pottery, we have in particular Thracian women tattooed in different parts of their face and bodies. So we get information from there as well.
So even though the bodies themselves have perished, we can see from representations and from metalwork. Thank you. Here's another great question. Could one of the speakers illuminate a bit more about the Thracian love of and fame for their horses? What evidence do we have for Thracian horse breeding and even perhaps exporting of horses?
Okay, I'm definitely not the expert here, but we have the sources, the written sources, who present the Thracians as horse breeders. And from the classical and Hellenistic period, we have a lot of aristocratic burials that are accompanied, the people that were buried were accompanied also by horses. Some of them with the trappings on them. So, and also the Thracian armor and the Thracian weapons, some of them are considered to be adopted especially for mounted warriors. And there is a late source, I can't remember which author, who says that, for example, Thracians invented fighting on horseback with shields. That was specifically a Thracian invention. So Thracians were famous for the cavalry they had.
Fascinating.
I would also like to add that a proof for exporting horses, probably a diplomatic gift, we can find from Scythian graves in Crimea, the so-called royal Scythian graves, where we find entire horses decorated with these Thracian-style trappings, which traveled for hundreds of kilometers, or maybe they were shipped, by sea on the Black Sea. So we have these horses which appear in a totally different environment around the middle of the 4th century BC.
And just to add that Homer talks about Thracian horses, and the famous horses of Phryxus, the Thracian king who came to help Trojans in the Trojan War. and Odysseus with Diomedes killed him. So we get information from various periods and literary sources. Moreover, we have horse burials in Thrace. So horse was really an important animal in the region.
Thank you all. Here's another, actually very impressive, perceptive questions from our audience. A viewer asks, we never see the implements or tools used for the manufacture of these beautiful artworks. What evidence do we have for the tools? And also, how were artisans able to magnify the intricate works that they were creating? Perhaps no one mentions them because we haven't found any yet, or we have any goldsmithing tools or other evidence.
We do have a lot of them, actually. There are quite a number of such finds from Thracian sites in Bulgaria, from the classical and especially from the Hellenistic period. We have matrices and we have stamps, and there are quite a lot of publications on such material. So. Entire goldsmithing workshops were discovered in terms of tools and instruments. So we do know about this, about the magnifying lenses. I'm not aware of any such examples from Thrace, but I know that from the Greek world, also already from the archaic times, they were presumably used.
Perhaps just one more of these. Questions which might be, but there are many good questions, so choosing just one or two more is really a challenge to consider. Here's a question from someone asking about, we should give some equal time to a little bit of time to the Romans. I was surprised to see 2nd century Roman artifacts in this area. Is Roman evidence influence in the area evident this early, or would these have been trade goods? The viewer would not have expected to see such artifacts until the late 3rd century.
Which area does it mean? In the entire place?
The viewer mentions specifically the gold head of Saint Severus, or Septimius Severus.
Yes, that's late 2nd, early 3rd century AD. But the Roman period is really evident in Aegean Thrace. So we have sites, we have material, we have findings, and I mentioned also Plotinopolis, where the bust of Septimius Severus was found, and this is a 2nd century AD city. Trajan founded the city and named it after his wife Plotini in the 2nd century AD. So the mosaics we saw, the wells, the buildings, everything date from the 2nd century AD and later. So it's not a surprise to see it there.
Thank you so much. Sadly, we've come to the end of our time, so I just want to pose one final question for all of our speakers before thanking them. As I said, I think we have put Thrace at the center of the discussion in a way that many of us have never really thought about it before. So maybe a final question is to ask all of you, looking forward into the 21st century, if you had to pick out a great challenge for the archaeology of Thrace, but also the most exciting prospect for the archaeology of Thrace, how would you respond to that, the challenge and the most exciting thing that you look forward to in the future?
So I will start. I think that, at least in Romanian case, one of the greatest challenges of Thracian archaeology is related to modern perception, because Thracian archaeology in East European countries has a political history and political engagement, and sometimes it was mixed in nationalistic discourses. And I think this is the challenge, to preserve a balance between the public expectation and of the objectivity of a historian. And as something that I would like to happen. I think in general, more attention for not so shiny artifacts. So beyond gold, beyond silver, and even marble, which is very precious, to look also at the small things which can tell bigger stories.
Thank you.
For me, I mean, there are many challenges. It's actually difficult to choose one. And in archaeology, it's the research itself that leads the way. But one of the greatest challenges for me is to trace roots, networks, contexts, see relations between sites and interrelations between objects and people, and find out and try to understand better the cultural physiognomy of the area with all the connections and contacts that they were there, since it was a multicultural area. I think throughout the antiquity, it was a multicultural area. So that would be the greatest challenge to see.
Okay, me last. I'll be a little bit more down to a little bit more prosaic. I think that the greatest challenge in Thracian archaeology is actually to protect and preserve it, because all that shiny things, all that gold and silver are very, very in high demand by looters and collectors, and it's a very sad story in Bulgaria, but not only in Bulgaria and elsewhere, with looting burial mounds and Roman cities and all kind of. So this is the challenge, is to preserve and to protect and preserve what we have, and in due time to study and analyze and make it available for the world. That would be.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for those closing observations. And thank you again for your wonderful presentations. And it's now my turn to hand it over to Sarah Cole for some final comments.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of today's speakers for these illuminating and wonderful and richly illustrated presentations, and for your thoughts about the future of Thracian archaeology. And thank you to all of you in the audience for joining us. We do want to note that the Getty Villa Museum remains closed following the Palisades fire, but we are optimistic that we may be able to reopen to the public in the coming months. So please stay tuned on our website, getty.edu, where you can go to find news and updates, and we hope to see you there in the future. Thank you.